If you want to start by just introducing yourself and your work.
Yeah. Hi. I'm a board certified physician in the United States, and I happen to have been a resident physician at the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020.
Can you start by telling me about how you became a physician?
Sure. Yeah. Basically, both my parents are in the field, so it was kind of sort of destined to be that I would end up in the field. I had that natural sort of inclination for it. I went to school, studied abroad actually. Because of that, I got to finish a little earlier than you would expect, and applied for residency, and ended up joining the program where I joined up, and that's where I was.
When you first started, what were your thoughts on the job?
Well, it was in a major city in the United States, and it's known, to be a tough place to work. So I knew it was going to be, cut out for more difficult work than maybe a lot of my other colleagues all over the country. So I sort of knew that going in, but yeah, the patient population is definitely a little more complex in many ways, socioeconomically and, diagnostically. So I knew that going in, and it definitely was a little bit more challenging than maybe, like I said, other places. But that being said, that's a reward in and of itself. You learn so much in that kind of environment, and I definitely learned so much working in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Before we get into the details of what happened in your work specifically, can you tell me about what it is that makes COVID so deadly?
So it's actually very interesting in its own way. We all thought initially that the virus itself was doing the killing. We thought that it was directly causing all this inflammation in the lungs that would cause them to fail. But it turns out basically, and it does sort of get proven true because steroids are an extremely effective treatment. Steroids are medications that lower the immune system. Basically, the body has never seen this virus. It has before, so COVID is called SARS, severe acute respiratory syndromes virus, COVID coronavirus 2. There is a SARS-CoV-1. So we've seen this virus before. This virus mutated so much that the body has not seen it to the extent that we've seen other viruses like the flu, like rhinovirus, which causes the common cold, or all those other viruses that cause like more milder illnesses that we sort of just recover from. And because the body's never seen this before, it's so new, so freshly mutated, it mounts an overwhelming immune response to try to combat this pathogen, this unknown pathogen. That response, unfortunately, so it's what drove the mortality of the virus so high, and the morbidity as well. The amount of how sick you were feeling and everything. Because the body was creating all this inflammatory gunk that was filling up in the lungs. The body was releasing certain molecules that stimulate your blood vessels to open real wide. And that's called shock, because your blood pressure goes down really low. And when you're in that state of shock, it's called septic shock when it's due to something like that. Your blood pressure goes really low, and your body isn't getting the blood that it needs to then deliver oxygen to the tissues. So you'll start going into things like kidney failure. And that's something that I personally noted a lot. As soon as a patient started going into kidney failure, with or without the shock, typically with though, their mortality rate just shot up. And conversely, when we started administering steroids, when we learned from, watching the literature, watching what other doctors are doing all over the world, learning that steroid medications, which lower and inhibit that immune response, which some would say, is a little paradoxical because that immune response is also required to eliminate the pathogen. But that being said, because the immune response is so strong that it's leading to so many, adverse effects happening, I noticed there was a lot of people recovering, getting the breathing tubes removed when we started introducing steroids into the medication regimen for the patient's COVID. So it wasn't the virus itself, it's our response to the virus, unfortunately.
And how have the treatments that are currently available for COVID leveraged this knowledge?
It's really incredible. One, the vaccine. So steroids get introduced a couple months in. People stop needing to get intubated, like breathing tube placed, because they're responding. They're able to sort of handle the virus a little better. Then we start doing these vaccine drives. And whatever the naysayers were saying, people went and drove. I remember we vaccinated a 91-year-old man who was happy and ready to go, ready to get his vaccine. And as soon as people started getting vaccinated, people stopped getting hospitalized and intubated for COVID. And they would be going to regular rooms. Sure, maybe their oxygen's a little low, but nothing that the regular nasal cannula, those things around the nose that you see, that couldn't help with. So there's that. Then came the advent of Paxlovid, which is a pill, an antiviral pill, which we actively use, and I prescribe it all the time, actually, to my patients who are at high risk to treat COVID when they're sick with it. And now, because of the way COVID itself was also mutated and become less deadly and more like just making you sick, a patient comes in with COVID, it's no longer potential death sentence that it used to be 3 years ago. And then especially after I give them a prescription for Paxlovid, which I can do over a telephone encounter, they're right as rain in 5 days. There's no lasting effects. There's no need to be, using supplemental oxygen forever. There's none of that unless it hit them particularly hard, which it still can. I mean, when I got sick with COVID, I got COVID twice. Both times were where I live now, not in the other place. And the second time particularly, I was a little scared I had to go to the emergency room because my oxygen was dropping to like the 80s, which if it's above 90%, it's okay. If it's below 90, then you might need some oxygen. But even still, I took my Paxlovid and I recovered with time. So yeah, our response, the scientific community response to the pandemic has been, we managed to turn this virus, which, doing all of this damage, into something that's like, yeah, be careful about it. If, we got to mask up, get your vaccines, but you'll be okay. And that's something that we did, as a community. Not me personally, but the scientists and the vaccines and all that stuff. So, yeah.
As someone uneducated on medicine, basically entirely other than that I take my own, I already think that that level of collaboration is beautiful, but knowing what's happening to an extent, being able to understand all of the complexity that's being used to create these solutions, that must just be mind-blowing.
Oh, truly it is. We had to invent a new vaccine type to create the COVID vaccine, which is called mRNA, which is using like this strand of RNA basically to introduce the vaccine. Which before, mostly it's either like a dead vaccine or viral particle or a sort of synthesized piece of the virus that signals that in the body to fight it. So that when the actual virus comes in, then we know to fight it. So this is a completely new way to deliver medicine at this point. And now it's being used for all kinds of purposes. I believe there are even anti-cancer purposes used for it. Not too versed on that particularly, but I do know that because of this advancement, more advancements are being made because I think that's amazing.
When everything began, when we started hearing about it on the news, what changed in your workplace?
Initially, not a whole lot was changing. We're talking January, February. January, it wasn't even a blip that we were concerned about. However, the news was rumbling about it. Everything was happening in China and abroad and everywhere else. We were aware of it and we were sort of bracing ourselves, but that really started happening around February 2020. I was working on one of the floors and it was toward the end of that month where I was working where we got our first patient. And that's sort of when everybody knew, okay, this is about to get real. And it was a very strange time because it sort of just happened all at once. The first patient actually ever to be hospitalized with COVID in that hospital was on my floor because my floor had a special isolation room. And within 1 or 2 weeks, our intensive care unit was already converted to a COVID unit. And sure enough, that's where they had shipped me to start working. So basically, it happened all of a sudden. It was one day it's not here, one day everything is COVID.
Did you feel like your education had prepared you for something like this?
I don't think any amount of education could have prepared anybody for this kind of, this is unprecedented. I mean, the last time we saw any kind of pandemic of this proportion was 100 years prior, Spanish flu, right? Which killed many, many, many people, but they didn't have the technology we do have now. But that being said, and with the technology that we do have at this time, we still were just woefully unprepared. I don't think anybody, even, seasoned attending doctors with 20, 30 years of experience, I don't think they were prepared for this or for the magnitude of what we were about to see.
Yeah. I remember when things really started to get intense, a lot of people, of course, were not only in denial, but actively fighting the procedures that medical professionals had set in place to protect people from this. Did you have any experiences with COVID truthers, if you will, that tried to fight off the things that you were doing to protect them?
Only on the internet for the most part. I did have one family member, but I learned this way after that they were like super not, into masking and all that stuff. But luckily, the city that I lived in was, for the most part, relatively okay with the mandates and everything had to go down. So, at the very least, the patients in the hospital, which honestly was 99% of my interactions with people during the pandemic anyway, and my fellow doctors, of course, nurses and everybody else. Everybody was pretty cool with us, at least our patients. When they were our patients, they were putting their lives in our hands, and I don't recall, luckily, anybody screaming to get that mask off of them and all that kind of stuff. Only in the internet, I really honestly saw that kind of stuff.
And did seeing that stuff on the internet and knowing that you were part of this system that these people were so violently opposed to get to you at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think it may even have contributed to a lot of the frustration. Or when I would read it, I was already going through a lot of anger and frustration and helplessness and all that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But definitely didn't help reading all that. Definitely made me feel a certain way because they're nice and comfortable talking about it during lockdown from their house, their mom's basement, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm here, actually on the front line, as they call it, seeing it every day.
I can't imagine putting what will be your entire life working into a job that is meant to help people just for so many people to violently want to fight back against it. That's just, I can imagine how difficult that would be.
Yeah, no, it's definitely extremely frustrating. To that respect, our patient population, like I said, in the hospital I was working, they're very particular. Part of that is a little bit of that sort of attitude, but luckily it didn't come out during the pandemic. At least the people that wanted to do whatever they wanted to do, they wanted to do whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But at least they more or less were like, hey, okay, we know this is serious.
Yeah. Can you tell me about the first case?
The first case I wasn't too sure of because he was in another floor, basically. I do have certain cases of my own patients that I can, talk about.
If you'd like to go into the first case that you directly experienced and worked with.
Yeah, yeah. So that was in the ICU. Basically, what they did, our hospital works with 24-hour shifts, which is actually kind of rare, or it's happening less now in a lot of residency programs all over the country. But my hospital was still doing that. So we're usually in the ICU have these 24-hour shifts every 4 days. You take the day next off, and then if it's a weekend, you don't go to work. If it's a weekday, you go back to work the day after that. That was completely flipped on its head, and we were converted to a different schedule, which would be 3 days on for 12 hours, 3 days off. And that was to limit our exposure to the virus, give us a break from what we were seeing, I suppose, and try to sort of take care of things in that way. So I was on a 3 days on day shift, because there's a day shift and a night shift. My first patient was this guy. He wasn't intubated, but most of the unit was intubated at that point.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically, when for whatever reason you can't breathe anymore by yourself, your lungs are too affected by a disease, or your brain is unable to tell your lungs to breathe. You need to be intubated, which is a breathing tube needs to be placed down your throat, and the machine is going to be breathing for you. So many COVID patients were so severely sick with the disease that they had to be placed on this breathing tube to keep them alive. So that was the majority of the unit most of the time. Luckily for this patient that I had, he wasn't yet there. He needed like a special kind of device that just sent a lot of oxygen through his nose, and with that he was maintaining his oxygen levels that we could monitor. But the problem was that any little movement he would do, he would start to go down in his oxygen level. And even though he's like, I feel more or less okay, we knew that if we maintained his oxygen level less than it should be, his brain isn't getting the oxygen it needs, and that's really, really bad for him. So we would tell this poor man, mind you, this man is like I think he was in his 30s or 40s, actually pretty young for a guy. Didn't really have any medical problems. Had a wife and kid at home, or kids, he had a family. And he also only spoke the language that I also speak. So I really connected with him over that. We were from the same place, so we connected a lot over that. And basically the entire month that I was in that unit, he was there. And of course I was staying with him. And I was fighting vehemently to keep him on the oxygen and not put the breathing tube in, because I knew that if we put the breathing tube, he probably wasn't going to make it, because that was the outcome for most of the patients during that time. If they were on the breathing tube, it was only a matter of time. So I really was doing everything that I could, and the whole team obviously was doing everything that they could to not put him in the breathing tube. But the poor guy, he was locked in that room for basically a whole month, begging to be intubated because he just couldn't take it anymore. He was like, I'm starting to not be able to really feel well. I can't breathe. Please just intubate me at this point. And obviously, if he met the criteria, would have done it. but he was so close to not needing the criteria. We're like, let's just hang out. He stayed with me during the whole month that I was there. I would even arrange, and we would do that also with our patients. We would arrange an iPad and FaceTime with the family members who would see their patient who was either intubated or maybe they're on the oxygen, so they're still awake and talking, and they would talk to their family. So I would talk with his brother a lot. His brother was super appreciative. He would, every time he would call me, after I put him on with his brother, he would tell me, I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Let me know if you need something. I'm gonna get you a little gift. I'm like, no, it's okay, man. It's okay. I'm just doing the job. After that month, I'm fast forwarding a little bit to complete this arc of the story. The brother does call my work phone, and I'm actually not on the ICU anymore. I was somewhere else. But I pick up and I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? He's like, hey, listen, I was just told by somebody that my brother died. You're not there anymore, right? I'm like, no, I'm not, but I can check that for you. Give me a second. So I log into the system, and he didn't pass away, but he did get intubated. This was about a week after I finished in the month there with him. And sure enough, he gets intubated. COVID really liked to affect the kidneys, part of the shock response. And once I knew he was going into kidney failure, I already knew that what the outcome was going to be. And sure enough, within maybe another week or so, he was gone. Yeah. That broke my heart a little bit there, especially after fighting the whole month with him.
Yeah. How does your personal connection to your patients impact your work?
I do like to get to know them, even if it's for a little bit, or try. Not perfect. I think having that connection is really important to having a good doctor-patient relationship. Obviously, without going too far or becoming their best friend or anything like that, where you're going to do favors for them. I find a lot of importance in it, and I really do try to maintain that. And in the setting where I work now, it's extremely important to me. A lot of the patients back during the pandemic obviously were intubated, they were sedated. You can talk to them, but the ones that were awake and before and after the pandemic, I really did try to maintain that.
During your work, what is the most overwhelmed you have ever been on the job?
I remember 7 a.m. coming into the ICU to work a shift, and a nurse sees me, pulls me aside, says, listen, there's a code which means a patient's heart has stopped beating, and the whole team is now trying to resuscitate that patient on one end, the front end of the ICU. That being said, there's another patient who is currently actively coding on the back end of the ICU. We need you to run this code because the rest of the team is all the way over there doing that. That was the first code I had ever run, because typically when you're in a certain part of your training, I guess, is when you are typically running the codes. I wasn't there yet, and now I'm running this code because there was nobody else. There was nobody, and this is happening right now. So yeah, I mean, sure enough, I run over there, and the most that I really had known about the codes was just the compressions part. And I'm, directing one of the other residents here, going and do the compressions. He's already intubated, so someone just has to do the bag valve mask. We give a certain series of medications, and I just sort of figured out as I went. Granted, it was a patient who was very, very progressed with COVID, so he didn't make it, unfortunately, and probably neither did the other code. But it definitely was an insane experience. It was my first code that I was running by myself. So that was pretty crazy. I mean, luckily it was my other residents there who also were inexperienced and who also were kind of freaking out like me. But we did the best we could, with what we had there. And on that topic too, I was now in one of the floors working on the nighttime, and two patients who were right next to each other coded at the exact same time. So it's a team of 3 doctors. One doctor's doing compressions on one patient, the other doctor's doing compressions on the other patient, and I was just running between the both of them. Do we give the meds? Give the epinephrine. Do we do this? Okay, do this. Again, doing the best that we possibly could. But unfortunately, as it is with the virus, at that point where you're that sick, unfortunately, that ill with the infection, and your heart stops from the overwhelming shock, it is extremely difficult. It's already difficult to bring somebody back one day when their heart stops beating. So yeah, I mean, they didn't make it. Yeah, that was definitely a very, very crazy time.
Yeah.
Oh, and one more crazy code story. On the same floor, my shift is almost over. Patient crashes. I just ran in there and started running it. He had a shockable rhythm. In the TV shows, they say shock him when they have a certain rhythm. It's rare to see that kind of rhythm when someone goes into cardiac arrest. For the most part, it is just compressions because they're mostly flatline. In his case, he did have a shockable rhythm. So I shocked him, and we kept with the compressions and everything, and we actually managed to bring him back. After bringing him back, finished up, I went home, and I mean, unfortunately, again, this is a very delicate state you're in. He, within 15, 20 minutes, according to my coworker who had taken over for the day, she told me, hey, he didn't make it. Yeah, but, it's the crazy stuff you see. The crazy stuff you see in that setting.
Yeah. During your time doing your work, did you have any moments where you felt like you just couldn't keep going?
Yeah, a lot. A lot. I knew that I had to, especially when you're a resident, you kind of sort of have to. But yeah, I mean, just going home and just collapsing and just numbing your brain with videos, Netflix, video games to try to distract yourself from it. But the reality was exactly that. Just wondering, how much more am I going to be able to take of this? How much more is this going to take from me? Yeah, even there was, in my city, there was a physician who had taken their own life as a direct result of the stress caused by the pandemic. So it's not easy. And I was alone in my apartment. Sure, my mom called me every day freaking out. I had friends who I spoke with on the daily. I was blessed in that regard. But at the end of the day, I would go home to an empty apartment and be there for 3 days at a time straight. Basically, that was fuel to sort of wallow in those sort of feelings. So
As you made it through the worst of it, there must have been a lot of recovery to do in your mental health. How did you approach processing something this traumatic?
well, even though the pandemic had ended, that just means that the work goes back to how it was before, plenty of it. So I sort of just put it in a box in my head and compartmentalized it and just try to pretend like everything was fine and didn't really do anything at that time because I was busy. I was still working. I still had work to do. Things still had to be done. I didn't really start my mental recovery. Honestly, I started it last year when I started seeing a therapist and really talking about it in that safe space, in that environment. 'Cause it's one thing to just talk about it to your friends and your family, but it's another thing to talk about it with a professional.
Yeah.
That really did allow me to sort of decompress a lot of what was being felt and cope accordingly without doing the harmful and negative coping mechanisms that I had acquired during that time.
Right.
But honestly, the recovery only probably started truly a year ago, and I think a lot of stride has been made in that, and clearly I'm very functional and everything's okay. But that's a scar that will never leave my psyche,
Of course.
and it's just something to learn to live with.
Yeah. Do you feel like the education and work you've done has been worth it?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, it's a lower socioeconomic population, so you're really helping people that need help. So it was truly a privilege to be there to help them out, and especially through this whole situation. And because you learn so much more in these settings, because you see so much more, it's just more rewarding in that respect as well. But definitely learned a lot there, and definitely a lot more than I would have learned in some, I don't know, cush suburban program or something where people didn't even see the levels of things that I saw in mine. But as a result, I work my way around a ventilator, and maybe some other of my peers, they can't really as much.
During the pandemic, at its worst, did you ever lose someone in your personal or work life?
Yeah, so we did have a couple, well, before I mention of a loss, basically most of my fellow residents got sick with COVID at one time or another. For whatever reason, maybe because I pretty much stayed like this my entire shift. I didn't take a bathroom break. I wouldn't go eat. I wouldn't take my mask off for a second, those 12-hour shifts I was working, because I was scared of getting sick. But a lot of other people who, unfortunately, they have to eat, they have to go to the bathroom, really understandable. And they would do it outside, but for whatever reason, that virus is everywhere and it lingers everywhere, and I don't even know how to explain that. But they would get sick a lot, and some people got sicker than others and had to be monitored closely. There was one loss, one of the staff workers in my hospital. We did lose that person. I didn't know that person personally, but I believe it was a nurse or one of those like support workers there. And yeah, the person was in on my floor, very, very sick, tube in and everything, unfortunately, intubated, I mean. And of course, the prognosis, we're doing everything we can, especially as someone who was basically part of our little family there. But again, there's only so much that you can do. I was even there that night, I believe, working. that was just, I may have not known this person personally, but it still hit hard. It bring it a little close to home there, you know.
Definitely.
That could have been me. That could have been my friends. That could have been anyone. So definitely a heartbreaking experience.
Yeah. Wow. Can you tell me about your most memorable experience with a patient?
I think the most memorable experience that I have the most recollection of directly is this time we had a patient, young guy, in his 30s, very young dude. He was extubated. The breathing tube was taken out because he was getting better, and he was looked to be recovering from COVID. And of course, it's a very tricky time. They can always go back to respiratory failure, like their lungs could stop working, and it's always a time where we're to be on our toes. And we're keeping an eye on him. But sure enough, we noticed that he starts losing his ability to breathe by himself. And
Mm.
sure enough, he's not breathing. So we rush to bring him back. He was only a respiratory failure, so we didn't have to do full CPR, which is chest compressions. So we were just getting the bag you see in all those shows and everything to give him the breathing with the bag there and the mask. There was some issue going on where we were unable to get anesthesia to come down to intubate him for a solid 30 minutes. They must have been horrendously backed up because the anesthesia team who does the intubations in the hospital, they were overwhelmed. I'm absolutely sure of it. All day long, they were just intubating left and right. So we had this nurse, this travel nurse. He was one of my favorite nurses, man. This very, very tall, flamboyant dude, and always with good vibes, always trying to do the best job, and always a bit of a character, man. I really enjoyed working with him. And he sees that the amount of respirations we're giving to the bag, they're not enough. Just a regular squeeze, it's not enough. So he has to literally take both hands on the bag and squeeze it as hard as he can to force as much oxygen into those lungs so that it can be enough to sustain his life.
Wow.
And this man did that for 30 solid minutes. He did that so much so, and we were just trading off holding the mask in place over his mouth, that we were actually able to resuscitate this patient without the use of a breathing tube. He woke up. He actually woke up and was breathing by himself after that. And that was just like anesthesia just gets here, they put on their spacesuit and everything, and they're like, all right, let's go. The moment they step into the room, we're like, he's back and he's breathing fine. I think we don't need to intubate him for now. So that was just something that stayed with me. I think I stayed even like half an hour after my shift, because I was at the end of my shift, just to sort of see that craziness through. So that was extremely memorable, and just one of those crazy things that you can see, working in that kind of setting, rare as it is. That being said, I had another young patient, similar age, who we couldn't save him, and that was the other side of the coin there. And to me, he was just memorable because of how young he was. He was probably only like maybe 5 to 10 years older than me. And yeah, that just struck a chord with me because he was otherwise healthy, aside from one condition that he had. But even that one, I didn't think would necessarily have contributed so much to him not, getting so sick from the virus. There was also this one guy who was, he had the breathing tube longest time, solid week, 2 weeks maybe. Every single day, his family was calling, asking, "Hey, how's he doing? Hey, how's he doing? Can you get the iPad? Hey, how's he doing? Hey, how's he doing? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hey, how's he doing?"
Oh.
They're so sweet, but every single day they needed to see him. And, I would get the iPad out and put the FaceTime and, show him. But if I recall correctly, we were able to bring him back as well. One of the very, very rare instances where somebody came back from the breathing tube, we were to bring him back. And the joy on the family's face when we told them, hey, we're going to take the breathing tube out. I think we're going to be okay. And the thank yous and everything like that, the appreciation. You had mentioned before how there was a lot of people out there who were denying the existence of the virus and denying the need for masking and the vaccine down the line and all that. And I'm very blessed to say that a lot of people really did show their appreciation throughout the city where I was working. They really did. They helped me get to the day.
Looking back on the way that the pandemic was handled in your hospital, what could have changed for the better?
It's hard to say. In my hospital, I'll be honest. I think my boss, he really did a damn good job of making sure everybody had the the PPE, personal protective equipment, the special masks, the gowns, the gloves, face shields. He made our schedule so that we wouldn't be as exposed as we could be. We could have been. And a lot of supply chain stuff and a lot of that kind of stuff, scheduling, that really helped us out a lot. And even like charity kitchens are coming in and giving food to us, providing food to us, while we're working. So it's hard to say what could have been improved because again, this is so unprecedented. It's for me personally, I don't feel like it's fair that I would have something like that to offer to my boss, to my hospital. Because everything else about it aside, about the place of work, the response to COVID, I think, was probably among the best that could have been done with the resources available.
That's amazing to hear. Does the fact that things were handled well in your workplace help dispel some of that "I could have done this" feeling that so many medical professionals get?
Funny enough, no, not at all. Not at all. I think I'm just aware enough looking back to know that, you can only do so much in this kind of circumstance. But survivor's guilt, I guess, is the real thing.
Right.
And being there, my job was to help them. And so many people, we lost so many people. I don't even know how many codes I was part of, and it was maybe not even 1% that would survive them.
Yeah.
I still felt like I failed them all. At the worst of it, I mean, not anymore. But at the worst of everything, I felt like almost like I was a killer. Felt like I was killing them. I felt like I was a bad person because I was just unable to save them.
Mm.
Like I said, now obviously it's a much different point of view, from a different perspective.
Yeah.
But that was a strong feeling back in the day. If we had known to use steroids sooner, we had known to do this, to do that. Hindsight is always better in 2020. So I think we're trying, to do the very best we could during that. I would not doubt for a second that, we all were just there. We were all in. We were ready to, do whatever we had to do.
That's very honorable.
It's just a job. We're doing our job. That's all it was.
But I mean, it's more than that. I hope you do. There's more to this than a job. This is humanity distilled. The ability to say, I'm going to do everything I can to save this person's life. To take such a large portion of your life and dedicate it to learning to save people's lives. I don't think it's possible to discount that.
Well, I really appreciate that, man. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, I think everybody, people say that the people that go into medicine for the money, first off, are stupid because there's not that much money compared to the other jobs that really get the big buck. And obviously they're doing it for the wrong reason. I think every one of us does have that little bit of, I want to help people. A job that is rewarding in that respect, I'm sure affords a certain particular kind of lifestyle or job security, better said, because what other job field had so much job security than the healthcare field? You see the travel nurses and travel doctors and travel everything. But no, I appreciate that a lot. I really do.
As you continue to both work and improve at the job you're doing, what lessons do you feel have most stuck with you from the pandemic?
I think the biggest one, and it's something that I sort of apply to my personal life, is that you really don't know when it's going to happen, when you're going to go, when your time is up. So live your life to the absolute fullest, obviously without being a hedonist or hurting other people in the way. But go have fun with your life when you can, and don't be stuck waiting on something. I recently found a love for traveling, and because of my new job, my post-residency job, it's giving me a little bit of extra funds to be able to do that. And I've learned to realize that traveling is one of those things in my life that I'm going to be doing so much more often, because there's so many people to meet in the world, so many places to visit, and just stay in one place here and then you're gone. Be like, it could be a waste. That is the largest lesson that I learned from all of this. And that being said, just to have so much compassion for your patient, or try to feel what they're feeling, try to be there with them, try to help them out, however you can, if you can.
Yeah.
Tell me a story, I wanna hear it. You might think it's boring, but I'm interested.